My name is Declan Murtagh. I'm 29 years old, and I want to be upfront with you about something before this story even starts. I'm not the hero of some grand rebellion. I didn't leave my family's house with a plan tucked in my back pocket and a confident smirk on my face. I left with a duffel bag that smelled like old laundry, $43 in my checking account, and my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. My family laughed, genuinely laughed. My mom stood on the porch with her arms crossed and said, "You'll be back by Thanksgiving." My brother Marcus, older than me by 4 years, always louder than me by about 40 decibels, leaned against the doorframe and said, "Give him 2 weeks, maybe 3 if he finds a couch." I didn't say anything back. I just drove away. And that silence, that choice to not say a single word, turned out to be the most powerful thing I'd ever done in my life. I just didn't know it yet. Let me back up, because if I start from that moment alone, none of it makes sense. You need to understand the house I grew up in. Not the physical structure, the 4-bedroom split level in Barrie, Ontario with the cracked driveway and the overgrown hedges nobody ever trimmed, but the invisible architecture inside it. The way love was distributed like a resource that was always running low. The way certain people in that house were quietly taught, over years, that they mattered less. I was one of those people. I'm the youngest of 3 kids. There's Marcus, who's 33 now, broad-shouldered and loud and capable of charming a room inside of 90 seconds. Then there's my sister Paige, 31, smart in a quiet, calculating way, the kind of smart she kept half hidden because it made her easier to manage. And then there's me, Declan, the one my dad used to call the easy one, which I only understood much later was not a compliment. It meant I didn't make noise when things were unfair. It meant I absorbed. My dad, Glenn, worked in logistics for a freight company out of Barrie. He was a functional man, reliable, not cruel but not warm either, more like a piece of furniture that had always been there, useful but not something you ever thought to be grateful for. He had his favorites, and Marcus was it. You could see it in how his face changed when Marcus walked into a room, like something in him relaxed. My mom, Sandra, is more complicated. I say that carefully, not because I'm trying to protect her feelings, but because I think she genuinely believed she was being fair, and that belief was precisely what made things so hard. She worked part-time at a dental office and volunteered at the church and kept an immaculate calendar on the kitchen wall. She ran the house with a kind of cheerful efficiency that left very little room for anyone to say anything was wrong. Because look, the calendar was color-coded, the dinners were hot. What exactly was the problem? The problem was in the invisible stuff. The way Marcus's job offer from a mid-sized trucking company got a family dinner and a celebratory cake. But when I got accepted into a graphic design certificate program at Georgian College, my mom said, "That's nice, honey," and then asked Marcus to pass the salt. The way Paige and I were expected to manage our own tuition while Marcus had his first 2 years quietly subsidized by our parents. Something we only found out by accident when Paige overheard a phone call. The way, at Christmas, the gift pile on Marcus's side of the tree was consistently, obviously larger, and when Paige once pointed this out at maybe age 16, our mom cried and said she tried her best and the whole evening caved in on itself. You stop pointing things out after a while. You learn to measure the unfairness quietly, privately, like keeping a ledger nobody else can see. I lived in that house for longer than I should have. Part of it was financial. Barrie isn't cheap and entry-level design work doesn't pay like people think it does. Part of it was inertia. And part of it, if I'm being honest, was hope. The dumb, persistent kind that keeps whispering maybe this time will be different. For a while, I told myself the arrangement was temporary. I paid rent. $500 a month, which my mom said was just to build good habits. Though somehow Marcus had lived there for 6 months after his first job started, and the subject of rent never came up. I did my own grocery runs. I kept my room clean. I tried, in this low-key way, to make myself useful without being a burden. But there's a kind of invisibility that's worse than being ignored. It's being present, contributing, doing everything right, and still being treated like a guest in your own history. Like your wins are neutral and your needs are inconvenient. The breaking point wasn't one dramatic thing. I wish I could give you a clean villain moment, a single explosion to point at. It was more like a series of small structural failures, and then one morning the ceiling came down. It was a Sunday in late September 2 years ago. My mom had organized what she called a family catch-up dinner. her phrase for the semi-regular Sunday meals she'd been doing since Marcus moved into his own place about 6 months prior. Marcus had bought a condo in Innisfil with his girlfriend Britt, which was treated in our family like the moon landing. There had been a housewarming party with catered food that my parents helped pay for, and for weeks after, my mom talked about the condo's open concept, like she'd personally designed it. I drove over that evening in the same used Civic I'd had since college. I remember it was raining, that particular kind of September rain that doesn't quite decide whether it wants to be summer or fall, just sits there being cold and indecisive. I was in a decent mood, actually. I just landed a small contract with a local marketing agency. Not huge, but consistent. I'd been quietly saving money for months, telling nobody, and I had about $3,000 set aside in a savings account I'd opened at a credit union. I was starting to feel like something in my life was turning, slowly, like a very large ship. I should have known better than to feel good walking into that house. My dad was in the living room watching a game. Paige was already there, sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of wine, looking slightly tired. She'd driven down from Orangeville where she lived with her partner, a quiet carpenter named Theo, and I could tell from her expression she'd already been there long enough to be slightly worn out by the general atmosphere. "Deck," she said when she saw me, and there was a warmth in it that I always appreciated about Paige. She's not a hugger, not loud, but she's real. She means it when she says your name. My mom was at the stove, making the pot roast she made for every family dinner, the one she'd been making since we were kids. It's good, it's genuinely good, but it also functions as a prop. The warm kitchen smell, the familiar recipe, the sense of everything is fine here, we are a normal, loving family. "Marcus is running a bit late," she announced without turning around. "He and Britt are coming from the gym." 20 minutes later they arrived, and the energy in the house changed the way it always did when Marcus walked in. Upward, louder, more. He had that quality. My dad came out of the living room, which he almost never did before dinner was on the table. Britt was fine. I want to be fair. She was pleasant, she made conversation, she helped set the table. But she'd absorbed something from the dynamic, the way partners sometimes do, and there was a very slight register in the way she spoke to me and Paige that was different from how she spoke to Marcus and my parents. Not mean, just faintly less interested. We sat down. The food was served. The first 20 minutes were fine, the normal family dinner rhythm, who's doing what, how's work, the hockey season starting up. Then my dad asked Marcus about the promotion he'd mentioned the week before. And Marcus, in that way he had, leaned back in his chair and grinned and said, "Yeah, it came through. Regional Operations Manager. Basically running half the Ontario division." My mom put her hand over her heart. My dad nodded with this quiet, satisfied look. There was a toast. I was genuinely happy for him, more or less. I clapped, I said congratulations, I meant it at maybe 60% and was faking the rest, which I think is honest. Then my mom, still glowing, turned to me with the particular energy of someone who has just given a lot of attention in one direction and is now briefly redistributing it, and said, "Declan, what's new with you?" And I said, maybe this was a mistake, maybe I should have deflected, but I said, "Actually, I've been building up some savings. I'm thinking about getting my own place by the spring." There was a pause. My dad looked at me with what I can only describe as skeptical amusement. Marcus made this sound, not quite a laugh, more of a breath through his nose. My mom said, "Oh, that's well, you need to be sure you can afford it." "I've been saving," I said. "I have a new contract too, so." "You mean that freelance thing?" Marcus said. "Deck, that's not reliable income. That's not how you get a mortgage." "I'm not looking for a mortgage right now. Just a rental. Rentals in this area are insane right now," Britt offered helpfully. "I know, that's why I've been saving." My dad said, "You'd need first and last references, a consistent pay stub. Do you have all that?" I looked at him. "I'm working on it." Working on it isn't the same as having it. I don't know why that specific sentence hit the way it did. He'd said similar things before. But something about that night, the toast for Marcus, the barely contained pride, and then this pivot to cataloging my deficiencies. Something about the cumulative weight of it made my jaw tighten in a way I couldn't immediately release. I said, "I'll figure it out." My mom changed the subject. That was that. But on the drive home, in the rain, in my old Civic, I made a decision. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't announce it, Didn't argue about it, didn't demand acknowledgement. I just decided. I was leaving. Not in the spring. Not when I had everything lined up. Not when I had their approval or their blessing or a moment where they all finally understood my worth. I was leaving as soon as I physically could, even if that meant leaving imperfectly. I want to tell you what happened the day I left, not because it was dramatic, but because the opposite was true, and somehow that mattered more. I'd spent 3 weeks after that dinner quietly accelerating everything. I told my contract client I was available for additional hours. I sold my second monitor and an old camera lens on Facebook Marketplace. I ate at home, didn't buy anything I didn't need, and watched my savings account crawl from $3,000 to $4,200 and change. I called 8 rental listings in Barrie and 2 in Innisfil and 1 in Collingwood before I found a bachelor apartment on Livingstone Street in Barrie. Second floor of a converted older house, radiator heat, a kitchen the size of a generous closet, $950 a month all in. The landlord, a retired electrician named Herb, did a phone interview with me and then said, "You seem like a quiet guy." I like quiet. I signed the lease by email. I gave him first and last from my savings. I had $43 left in my checking account and about $200 in a jar I kept in my sock drawer. I packed over 2 nights after everyone was asleep. I didn't have much: my design equipment, clothes, some books, a small record collection, the coffee maker I'd bought myself the previous Christmas. I put everything in my car in 2 trips. It all fit. On a Wednesday morning in mid-October, I left a note on the kitchen table that said, "Moving out today. I'll e-transfer my last rent and utilities before the end of the week. Thank you for everything." Asterisk. That was it. I drove to Livingstone Street, carried my stuff up 1 flight of stairs, and stood in the middle of a tiny empty apartment with the October light coming through unwashed windows. And I said out loud to nobody, "Okay." My phone started ringing around noon. My mom. I let it go to voicemail. "Declan, I got your note. Where are you? Why didn't you say anything? Call me back." Then Marcus, an hour later. "Bro, what's going on?" "Mom's upset." "Where'd you go?" Then my dad, which surprised me. He almost never called first. "Declan, call your mother." I texted back a single message to all 3 of them. Asterisk. I'm fine. I have a place. I'll be in touch. Asterisk. My mom called again that evening. This time I picked up. "Why didn't you tell us?" she said, and her voice had that particular quality. Not quite hurt, not quite angry, somewhere between the two, with a layer of confusion on top. "I didn't want it to become a debate," I said. "A debate? We're your family. We could have helped. You would have told me all the reasons I wasn't ready." Silence. "That's not fair," she said. "Maybe not," I said. "But it's accurate." More silence. And then, almost quietly, "You don't have any furniture. I'll get some. You have $43 in your bank account." I don't know how she knew that. Maybe she'd seen a statement. Maybe she just assumed. Either way, "I'll be fine, Mom. You'll be back," she said. Not cruel exactly. More like she was stating a fact about weather. "You'll see how hard it is and you'll come back." And then Marcus got on the phone. He'd been there, apparently, and said, "Dec, seriously, I give it 2 weeks, maybe 3. I said, "Okay," and I hung up. I sat in my empty apartment for about an hour after that call, just letting the silence settle. I didn't have a bed frame yet. Just a mattress I'd bought secondhand from a coworker for $60. Hauled up those stairs with Herb's help. I had my coffee maker and 1 mug. I had a box of pasta and a jar of pasta sauce and a pot I'd taken from home. I had my laptop and my headphones and my work. I won't pretend it wasn't hard. The first night in a place with no furniture. No TV. Just a mattress on the floor and the sound of the street below. It's not romantic. It's just quiet in a way that asks you something. Do you actually believe in yourself, or were you just angry? Asterisk. I lay there for a while with that question. And then I got up, made a cup of coffee, sat on the floor, and opened my laptop. I had work to do. Here's what nobody in my family understood, and what I had never quite found the language to explain to them. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't directionless. I wasn't figuring it out in the drifting, aimless way they seemed to imagine. I was working, carefully, methodically, in a field that didn't come with a corporate org chart or a recognizable title that made sense at a dinner table. Graphic design and visual branding. I've been doing freelance work for 3 years alongside my day jobs, building a quiet portfolio of logos, brand identities, social media packages, the odd website layout. My main contract at this point was with a marketing agency called Spruce and Company, a small but solid shop that did work for regional businesses across southern Ontario. They paid me reliably, they communicated well, and in the 3 weeks before I moved out, I'd had a conversation with the owner, a woman named Priya Chutta, about potentially expanding my hours. In my second week on Livingstone Street, that conversation turned into a part-time retainer. Not full-time employment, but consistent monthly income, enough to cover rent, utilities, and food with a small buffer. I bought a folding table from the thrift store on Dunlop. A chair, a floor lamp. I cooked every meal at home. I tracked every dollar I spent in a notes app, not because I was anxious about it, but because I needed to see the numbers clearly, needed to feel like I was in control of something concrete. I called Paige during my third week. We talked for about an hour. She'd been watching the whole thing quietly from her end, and the first thing she said was, "I was waiting to see if you'd actually do it. You thought I wouldn't? I thought you might not. But I'm glad you did." "Why?" She was quiet for a second. "Because you were disappearing in that house, December. I watched it happening for years." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, "Yeah." She asked if she could come see the apartment, and I said yes, and she came down the following Saturday with Theo, who brought a set of basic kitchen tools wrapped in newspaper because he said, "You can't cook properly with nothing," and Paige brought a plant. A small pot hose in a terracotta pot. "For the windowsill," she said, looking around the spare little apartment with something close to satisfaction. "It's small, but it's yours." "It's really small," I said. "It's really yours," she said. That plant is still alive, for what it's worth. Sitting in my kitchen right now. My family's reaction over the first couple months fell into a pattern that I came to recognize pretty clearly. First, there were the check-in calls. My mom every few days, then once a week, then less. Each call had a kind of evaluative quality. She asked about work, about money, about whether I was eating, and I could hear her listening for cracks, for signs that I was struggling, for the hesitation that would mean you were right, "I'm not ready, I'll come home." When those cracks didn't materialize, the calls got shorter. Then there were the Marcus calls. Sporadic, confidence adjacent. He'd say things like, "Barrie rentals are brutal right now. How are you holding up?" In a tone that was genuinely supportive but couldn't quite escape the undertow of, "I didn't think you could do this, and I'm mildly bewildered that you're still doing it." My dad barely called. That was normal. The thing is, and I want to be careful here because this matters, I wasn't doing any of this to prove something to them. Or rather, I was at first, and then I stopped. It was maybe month 2 when I realized that the satisfaction I'd imagined getting from their surprise wasn't actually what I was running on. What I was running on was something quieter and more private. The experience of waking up in my own space, on my own schedule, with problems that were entirely mine to solve. There's a particular freedom in that which I hadn't expected. When something goes wrong in your own place, the radiator makes a sound, you miscalculate a bill, a client wants a revision that requires 3 hours you didn't budget, you just deal with it. There's no one to second-guess your approach. There's no ambient commentary. There's just you and the problem and you, and eventually you figure it out. I started getting better at everything. Faster. More confident in small ways that added up. Let me skip ahead a bit, because the middle section of this story is less about dramatic events and more about a slow accumulation of things that mattered. By the end of my first year on Livingstone Street, my situation had changed considerably. Spruce and Company had brought me on as a full freelance design lead. Not an employee, but a consistent, significant contract that essentially functioned like a part-time senior position with the flexibility I needed to keep taking other work. My monthly income had nearly doubled from where it was when I left home. I had a savings account that no longer inspired mild panic when I looked at it. I'd also, through a combination of Priya's referrals and some work I'd put out on social media, started building a small client roster of my own. A cafe chain in Barrie. A real estate agent who needed personal branding. A startup out of Toronto that found me through Instagram. I bought a bed frame. I got a couch. A good one. Secondhand from a woman in Alcona who was upgrading. Dark green velvet, structurally perfect. I hung things on the walls. The apartment, the small, ridiculous bachelor apartment on Livingstone Street, started to feel genuinely, stubbornly like home. And my family, here's where it gets interesting. About 8 months in, the tone of my mom's calls shifted. The evaluative quality faded and something else crept in, something harder to name. She started mentioning things at home more. How the furnace had been acting up. How the driveway needed work. Once, clearly by accident, she said something about how it was quieter in the house, and then changed the subject so fast I almost didn't catch it. Marcus called around the 9-month mark with what he presented as casual conversation but was clearly a scout mission. He asked about my work. I told him generally. He made a comment about maybe needing someone for some design work for a project at his company. I said sure, send me the details. They never came. He asked how much I was paying in rent. I told him. He was quiet for a second and said, "That's actually not bad," which, from Marcus, was roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. What I noticed, and I say this without triumph, just observation, was that the story my family had been telling about me was running out of supporting evidence. The narrative of Declan, who couldn't quite manage, was encountering a mounting pile of contradictions, and I watched them, from a distance, not quite knowing what to do with that. My dad sent me a text one evening around the 10-month mark that simply said, "How's the job going?" Just that. No preamble. I texted back, "Really well. Thanks for asking." He sent back a thumbs-up emoji. For my dad, that was practically a sonnet. But here's the thing I want to make sure I say clearly, because I think it's the part that matters most. I wasn't tracking all of this to build towards some confrontation. I wasn't stockpiling their small acknowledgments to deploy later like ammunition. I was just living my life. Month after month, problem after problem, small win after small win. I made a friend in my building. A woman on the ground floor named Amara, mid-30s, worked in healthcare admin, had the most organized spice rack I'd ever seen. We developed one of those low-key urban friendships where you exchange spare keys and borrow milk and occasionally eat dinner together when neither of you wants to cook alone. She knew roughly what my family situation was. I'd told her a bit, and she never pushed for more details, just occasionally said, "How's the family?" with a tone that acknowledged it's complicated without demanding an explanation. I started running in the mornings. Not obsessively, 3 or 4 times a week, just enough to clear my head. I got better sleep. I read more. I started to understand, in a physical body-level way, what it felt like to not be in a constant low-grade state of managing other people's perceptions of me. I know how that sounds. But if you've lived in a home where you've spent years quietly calibrating your behavior to avoid being diminished, you know what I mean. It's a kind of tension you don't even realize you're carrying until it's gone. Something shifted in my family around the 14-month mark, and I started noticing it first with Paige. She called one night, a weeknight, which was unusual, and her voice was tighter than usual. She and Theo had been talking about buying property, she said. A small place somewhere between Barrie and Orangeville, maybe. And in the course of those conversations, she'd been doing the math on their finances and realized, with some clarity, that she and I had been operating at a disadvantage relative to Marcus for most of our adult lives. "I did the numbers," she said, and Paige doing the numbers was a serious thing. Marcus got about $22,000 in support from mom and dad over the years. College help, the condo down payment contribution, the housewarming, all of it, combined. "Okay," I said. "You got maybe 2,000. I got maybe 3. I was quiet. "I knew it was unequal," she said. "I always knew. But seeing the number." "Yeah. Does it make you angry?" I thought about it. "Not the way it used to." "What does that mean?" "It means I used to be angry because I needed something from them that they weren't giving me. Now I don't need it from them anymore. So the anger's just, it's there, but it doesn't have anywhere to go, and eventually it kind of dissolves." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not sure I'm there yet." "You don't have to be. Are you happy?" she asked, almost like the question surprised her. "Mostly," I said. "Yeah, mostly." And I meant it. Around the 16-month mark, I had enough saved, and my income was consistent enough to start seriously considering what came next. I'd been talking to a mortgage broker, a referral from Priya, and the picture was becoming surprisingly real. I was 28 at the time, with decent credit, a growing contract income, and a steadily building savings history. A small condo or townhouse wasn't impossible. Not in Barry proper, maybe, but in the surrounding area. I want to say I was calm about this. I was mostly calm about this. There were nights when the planning felt overwhelming and other nights when it felt like exactly the thing I was supposed to be doing. I mentioned it to Paige. I mentioned it very briefly and generally to my mom on one of our monthly calls. Her reaction was interesting, not dismissive this time, more like genuinely surprised. She said something like, "Oh, are you sure you're ready for that kind of commitment?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And she said, "Okay." Like she wasn't quite sure what else to say. 2 weeks after that conversation, my dad called me. Not my mom, my dad. He called on a Tuesday evening, which was unprecedented. "I hear you're looking at buying," he said. "Thinking about it. That's a big step. I know. You'll want to get a good inspector. Don't let them rush you on the inspection." That was it. That was the whole conversation, basically. But I sat with it for a few minutes after we hung up, because my dad giving me practical advice about a significant life step, without any skepticism in his voice, was, in its own muted way, a kind of acknowledgement. Not an apology. Not a retraction of the laugh on the porch 2 years earlier. Just, "You're doing a real thing, here is a practical thing I know about real things." From my dad, that was something. It's now 2 years and 3 months since I drove away from that house in the rain with $43 and a bag of laundry. I want to tell you what happened about 6 weeks ago, because this is the part of the story that people who've been in similar situations tend to want to hear. Not for revenge. Not because it validates everything. But because sometimes, after a long quiet period of building something real, the world turns in a way that lets you see the full shape of what you've made. I bought a place. Small townhouse in Innisfil, just under $300,000. A stretch, but the numbers worked. 2 bedrooms, a tiny backyard with a cedar deck that needs some love, and light in the mornings that comes through the kitchen window and lands in a way that makes even a bowl of cereal feel like it deserves to be photographed. I got the keys in early March. I didn't announce it to my family right away. Paige knew, of course. Amara knew. Priya sent flowers, which I didn't expect, and I made a note to always return that kind of gesture. I told my mom about 2 weeks after closing, casually, in a phone call. There was a long silence. "You bought a house," she said. "A townhouse. In Innisfil." "Yeah." Another silence. And then, quietly, "When can we see it?" I thought about that for a second. "I'll let you know when it's ready." It was a Sunday in April when they came. My mom and dad. Just them. I hadn't invited Marcus. Not for this first visit. I wanted to control the environment. I'd spent the weeks since moving and making the place mine. The green couch from Livingstone Street, the pothose Paige had given me now huge and trailing across the kitchen windowsill. A few pieces of art I'd collected slowly. The record player I'd finally let myself buy as a housewarming gift to myself. They arrived at 1 in the afternoon. My dad stood on the doorstep first, looked at the door, looked at me and said, "You painted the shutters." "Navy," I said. He nodded. "Good choice." My mom walked in and was quiet for longer than felt comfortable, moving through the living room and then the kitchen, looking at the details the way she used to look at my room as a kid, but this time without the authority to comment on anything. This was not her space. The terms were different here. She stopped at the pot hose in the kitchen window. "Is that the plant Paige gave you?" "Yeah." She ran her finger along one of the leaves. "It's huge." "I watered it," I said. And there was probably more in that than I intended. We had coffee. We talked. And here's the part one want to be careful describing, because it would be easy to say my mom suddenly understood everything and my dad delivered some profound speech, and the truth is messier and quieter than that. My mom, sitting at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around the mug I gave her, said, "I think we didn't always see you clearly. That's it. That's the actual sentence. No footnotes." She didn't elaborate, didn't build a case, just said that. I looked at her for a second. And then I said, "No, you didn't." Not angry, not triumphant, just honest. My dad was looking at the record player on the shelf. He asked what I'd been listening to. I told him. He said he hadn't heard that album in 20 years. We talked about that for a while. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a movie scene where everything is forgiven and restructured and the family is healed. But it was real, the first genuinely real conversation I'd had with both of them in years, maybe ever, because for the first time it was happening in a space where my position wasn't automatically the diminished one. 2 weeks after that visit, Marcus called. I want to tell you this part honestly because Marcus is the complicated one, the one I feel the most conflicted about even now. He called on a Saturday and asked if he could come see the place. Just him, not Brit, just him. I said yes. He showed up with a six-pack and a very Marcus energy of trying to be casual about a thing he was clearly not casual about. He walked around the townhouse doing the thing men do where they inspect structural details as a way of processing feelings. Checking the ceiling, the windows, commenting on the deck. Eventually we sat on the deck with beers and he said, "This is really nice, December. Thanks." He picked at the label on his bottle. "I didn't think you'd do it." "I know. I really didn't think you'd do it. I thought." He trailed off. "You thought what?" He looked a little uncomfortable. "I thought you were sort of, I don't know, comfortable. In a comfortable rut." I let that land. "That's interesting," I said carefully. "Because I think I was in a rut, but I don't think it was comfortable." He was quiet for a second. "Fair. The 2 weeks thing," I said, meaning the comment he'd made on the porch. He winced. Actually winced. "Yeah, that wasn't." "It's fine," I said, and mostly I meant it. "But I heard it. I want you to know I heard it." "I know." We sat with that for a while. The April air was getting warm and you could hear birds somewhere in the trees behind the property line, and it felt, for a strange moment, like we were just two people sitting outside. Not brothers with a history of imbalance, not a family's worth of unspoken dynamic, just two people. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "growing up, I think I accepted the way things were without really thinking about how they looked from your side. Or Paige's side." "Or Paige's side," he agreed. "She called me out on something a few weeks ago." "I know," I said. "She told me." He nodded. Drank his beer. "I don't know how to fix it exactly. I know I can't just..." He gestured vaguely. "You know." "Yeah. But I'm trying to understand it better." I looked at him. My brother, who had always been louder and more favored and less careful with his words. Sitting on my deck, in my space, on my terms, trying. "That's a start," I said. "Here's what the title of the story promised you, and I want to give it to you honestly. About 3 weeks ago, on a Thursday evening, my mom called and asked if she could come over. Not with my dad, just her. She wanted to talk. She came over the following Saturday morning. I made coffee. We sat in the living room on the green couch, and she had an envelope in her hand that she placed on the coffee table between us like it was evidence. "I found some of your old drawings," she said. "From when you were a teenager." I was going through the cedar chest in the hallway. I looked at the envelope. "You were always drawing," she said. "I don't know if I ever told you that I noticed." "You didn't," I said. "No." She looked at her hands. I think I was focused on what felt more immediate. Marcus was louder, always needed something. I don't mean that as an excuse. I just mean, I think you were easy in a way that I mistook for not needing. And I think that was a mistake I made for a long time. I didn't say anything for a moment. "I'm not asking to undo it," she said. "I know you can't undo something like that, but I want you to know that I see it now. And I'm sorry, Declan." The word sorry from my mother in that context in my living room sitting on my couch. I want to be honest about what I felt. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel healed. I felt something more complicated. Something I'm still working through. A kind of sad relief. Like a tension you've held for so long that, when it finally releases, it mostly just makes you tired. "I appreciate that," I said. "I do." "Is it enough?" she asked. And there was a real vulnerability in that question. She genuinely didn't know. She wasn't performing. She was asking. I thought about it honestly. "It's a start," I said. "A real one. But I need you to understand something. The way I run my life now, the boundaries I've built, they're not going away. Not because I'm punishing anyone. Just because they're necessary." She nodded slowly. "I love you, Mom. But I don't want to go back to the way things were." "I don't want that either," she said softly. I want to know who you are now. And there was something so genuine in that. I want to know who you are now, that I had to look away for a second, out the window where the morning light was doing its thing on the kitchen floor. Okay, I said eventually. Then let's start there. I'm writing this or telling this, I suppose, from the kitchen of my townhouse in Innisfil. It's early. The pot hose is obscenely large and I keep meaning to trim it back and keep not doing it. The record player is on, something low and unhurried. The navy shutters outside are wet from last night's rain. I'm 29. I own a home. I run my own small design studio now. Just me and one junior contractor I brought on 3 months ago. A kid straight out of college named Ben who is talented and slightly chaotic and reminds me of myself at that age. My annual income is more than double what it was when I left that house with $43 and a bag of laundry. My relationship with my family is not fixed. I want to be clear about that because I think the version of the story people sometimes want is the one where everything gets resolved neatly, where the apology lands and the family is healed and you all meet for Sunday dinners now and it's good. That's not where we are. We're in the careful, tentative, honest version of it. My mom and I talk once a week. My dad and I have started texting occasionally. Practical things, mostly a recommendation for a contractor, a question about his old truck. Marcus and I are building something slowly. Paige and I are and have always been the real thing. Are there still moments that sting? Yes, there are. My family didn't transform overnight into different people. My mom still sometimes defaults to a kind of well-meaning management that requires me to notice and redirect. My dad still finds emotional directness difficult. Marcus is still the loudest in any room. But here's what changed and what I think this whole story was always about. I changed. Not because I'm better than them or proved something to them, but because I stopped waiting for their permission to become real. The morning I drove away from that house, the rain, the $43, the hands shaking on the wheel, I didn't know what I was building. I couldn't have told you anything about where I'd be 2 years later. I just knew, with the animal certainty of something that's had enough, that the version of me who stayed in that house was going to shrink until there was nothing left to find. Leaving without money or a plan wasn't stupid. It was the most strategic thing I'd ever done, and not because I had some scheme, but because I had something harder to manufacture. The decision to bet on myself before I had any evidence I deserved to. They laughed. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I never responded. And 2 years later, they were standing at my door asking for a second chance. And I gave them one. Not because they earned it, but because I was whole enough now to decide what I wanted on my own terms in my own home, with coffee I made myself and a couch I picked out and a plant I kept alive through 100 small daily choices that nobody witnessed but me. That's the thing about building a life in the quiet, when no one is watching, when no one is cheering, when the only scoreboard is the one you keep yourself. You don't need the last word. You don't need the moment where they see it and gasp. You just need the life. And I have it. Thanks for listening.